let's look at the doing. Most recently, Sue Johnson has kind of relanguaged. And when I just updated my Mastering Competencies in Family Therapy, I had to redo the whole section because she redescribed it all. So we call it, she now calls it the EFT Tango, which basically, occurs in 5 parts. So the first thing is that, mirroring what's happening in the present process in the room between the couple. Helping the couple, she called it effective assembly and deepening. So assembling the emotions, by that, helping the couple to identify, give language to it, feel the emotions, and deepen their expression and experiencing of those emotions. Then choreographing engaged encounters. So some of us who are old school, we'd call this an enactment. She used to call it an enactment too, but kind of you're literally coaching the couples through how to have safe, emotionally engaged interactions where they're able to appropriately express their attachment needs, appropriately respond to their partner, and reestablish a sense of safety in the relationship. And you, as the clinician, you are choreographing. You are extremely active. This is not, sometimes people, I think they get the sense they've learned some, Carl Rogers, humanistic, and they just think this humanistic is this very almost passive role. You are very active in this approach, I promise you. So if you want to do a passive therapy, this is not it. And you're choreographing, you're very active, very attuned to what's going on in the room. And it's a kind of shaping what's going on with it. You help process the encounter. So you're helping the couple, talk about what they just experienced. And then you're integrating and validating and helping them integrate this new experience into their relationship and their everyday life. It's also individually. So this EFT Tango and the session, this also is individually oriented in terms of being able to help individuals experience what's going on. And so you are then reflecting both those primary and secondary emotions. You're doing emotional validation. And the one thing I do want to say is that when you're validating, you want to be very careful how you validate and from what position you validate, because validation is a way of taking authority in a certain way. And I think it's real important that when we're validating, we're doing it with a very careful attention to the client's, emotional, cultural, gender, religious values and their norms, and not ours, not what's in a theoretical textbook. But we have to validate in a way that really aligns with the client's unique personal values and beliefs. And so to be very mindful when we do that, in terms of, well, of course, and especially avoiding things like it's normal to feel this way. Well, yeah, all of that is culturally defined. So being careful in terms, what you want to do is witness what this person is experiencing in this moment, what their lived reality is. And you don't need to norm it to anything. Okay. Just, this is what you're experiencing. I hear, I see it, I understand it. And that's what the validation is. And to be careful to not wander off into inadvertently, with the best of intentions, kind of enforcing cultural gender norms that may not be true for the client. So evocative responding. So this is using reflections and questions to help them get in touch with their more vulnerable emotions that most of us prefer to not feel. Deepening the engagement of their inner experience, whether you're working with an individual or with a couple, and then helping them interpret what's going on with their emotions as well. So interaction, so when you got more than one person in the room here, you're going to be doing a lot of tracking that interaction pattern and cycles. So helping, so this is what was going on when things were just kind of neutral or normal. these were the first things that started happening when tension started rising, and what each person was doing, what they were feeling, how they interpreted what was going on, how things escalated, what things were like at their worst, how things kind of get back to normal. So really tracking that, putting it into words, and helping the couple get really good at seeing the patterns. Because one of the things you do is you actually kind of reframe the situation rather than your partner being the problem. That cycle, this negative cycle, is your problem, and the two of you have created it, and the two of you are going to have to work to find alternatives to it together. And so you're trying to get them aligned to relate differently to that pattern so that you can depersonalize the conflict. When you look at, I think the other major leading evidence-based treatment for couples is integrated behavioral couples therapy. And in that approach, they talk a lot about depersonalizing conflict. And I think where those two things overlap, as you can tell, I like to do the Unifying Framework and looking for the overlap in theories. So if you look how this overlaps with IBCT, it's this idea that rather than personalizing what my partner does to me, it's because you don't care, it's because I'll never be good enough for you. Instead of personalizing it, you help the couple develop a unified kind of alliance against this negative pattern, and that helps depersonalize it. It's not that you don't care about me, or that you're doing this to really upset me. It is because we've created inadvertently this pattern together because of our own vulnerabilities, and so we are going to work together to undo this pattern. I think I just said that. Reframing in the context reframing in the context of the cycle and attachment needs. So reframing what's going on as this is what each of us does when we feel like our relationship is threatened. And so when you have two or more people in the room, you're going to be doing a lot of these enactments, restructuring, choreography, whatever you want to call it, where you're helping the couple to turn to each other. You're coaching them, on how to express their needs in healthy ways, how to respond in effective ways to repair the emotional bond and sense of safety in the relationship. So blamer softening is a very specific set of techniques as well. And so what this refers to is typically, one of the two partners, you can have both partners do this. You really can. You really can. But often there's one partner who it tends to be more the blamer. It tends to be someone who's in the pursuing role, can often take this form. And so blamer softening can be one of the most difficult parts of treatment. And so working to kind of help that the person who has taken that blaming stance, who often feels like the other person does not care about them. I mean, that's really what's underneath the blaming but whoever's the more critical partner, we're help them soften their stance in words, helping them to use and to soften them so that they're able to express their needs without that harsh criticism. And so, you're going to help guide these people using the enactments, usually to express the underlying attachment-based needs rather than going for the attack. The criticism and the attack is a real easy street. And so you're going to try to teach them to step into their vulnerable emotions and express those to get their needs met, rather than trying to get their needs met with the attack. And as I always like to point out, it never works, does it, guys? When I'm talking to my, to my clients, that attack and that criticism really doesn't get you to the emotional safety, which ironically in our human psychology is what we're trying to do. But we don't want to be vulnerable while doing that, so we end up doing this attack. So really taking the blame and helping them to step into and own and express and lead with expressing their vulnerable emotions rather than going into the blaming or attacking stance. So there is an attachment injury resolution model. Like I said, those attachment injuries have a specific way that they are dealt with. I go into more detail in my Mastering Competencies and my family therapy books on this, but just to give you the broad strokes overview here. It parallels the general stages, but it's almost like a little mini version of EFT that you do just around the attachment. So again, de-escalation is the first of the three phases, where you're having each person kind of share their accounts of the incident, starting with the person who experienced the injury. And And also looking at, I thought this was interesting. They talk about their primary emotions as well as their negative models of their partner. Because when you experience an attachment injury, you feel betrayed by your partner, you fundamentally shift how you see them as a human being and as a partner. And so being able to put that into words, how this attachment injury fundamentally shifted how you see your partner. Maybe that's why it's such an attachment injury, because you redefine them differently after this. So that's the first phase. And in the second phase, you're kind of looking at the injury specific primary emotions. So during this moment of betrayal, and you in this case model, you're starting always with the person who feels betrayed. You would have them express how they felt, how they didn't care, or they're never good enough, didn't matter to you. You help them really put into words their primary emotions. You would help them with blame or softening, or if it's even sometimes it's the partner, blame, working on the blame or softening, whoever's doing it, and then begin facilitating the apology on behalf of the person who did the betrayal, to have a very heartfelt apology, sincere apology, and to have them kind of go back, and you're facilitating this apology. And then in the third phase, you're trying to reconsolidate what's the frayed bond, so you're helping the person who was betrayed being able to express acceptance of the apology. Now, that doesn't mean everything's 100% back to where they were before, and that means they forgive and forget, and you don't hold them accountable. But for the acceptance of the apologist just means that I accept that you are sorry for what you did. But, actual reconciliation can take time in terms of witnessing, behaviors. And I always tell my couples, the worst thing trust is the most fragile thing in the world. Because when it is broken, the only way to restore it is to not do something for long enough that the other person kind of, is able to let it go. But when is that? It's not like you can just go do something. You can do certain things that might help, like, I don't know, give your partner your password to your phone or your email or whatever, depending what the betrayal is. That'll help. But it's by not doing something for long enough that you get trust. And so, so even if you help facilitate the acceptance of the apology, it doesn't mean that we're totally 100% back to square one. It just means I'm accepting it and I'm willing to continue being in this relationship, working towards building safety, building a healthier relationship. So there's a very specific way that they work on repairing attachment injuries, and this is very important work if there's been an affair, if there has just been any sense of betrayal on the part of one or both partners. And I have had situations where both come in with attachment injuries. So we're doing a lot of this in the beginning to just help them get to a place where we can do the work of, reestablishing safety as the default setting in the relationship. But if there have been attachment injuries, you can't necessarily do the general EFT approach and really create a strong sense of safety in the relationship until this is dealt with. So in terms of the EFT family therapy, it's very, very similar to what we just discussed. Most of what was the couples approach. So just a few differences here. One is with families, you'll often find some pretty rigid patterns of how the parent and the child relate to one another. So you're looking for that. I think the most significant difference is when you're working with a couple, both parties are considered equally responsible for creating the emotional safety. But when you're working with families, it is primarily the parent's job to create the emotional safety, to take the lead, to take the risk, the emotional risk, right? Because the parents, it's definitely a hierarchical relationship. And so the parents are responsible for creating the safety. Not obviously 100% because but that they definitely have to take the lead and the primary responsibility for that. And I swear to God, I have had parents come in and they were like, I'm not gonna, repair this relationship until my kid, basically makes me feel safe. I'm like, that's not how it works. So you will meet parents who really feel like until the kid starts, being respectful and makes me feel safe, I'm not gonna lift a finger here. And that's just not an approach that will work. So the parents are responsible for creating that safety, and it's our job to help parents understand that that is their responsibility, and they can't sit there with their arms crossed waiting for respect to just flow out of the child. They're the ones who are going to have to put down their armor, put down the weapons and create the safety. Looking at developmental differences, and assessing those when we look at attachment patterns in families, looking at generational influences on attachment, because there's often an intergenerational process around attachment. We typically learn our attachment patterns in our family of origin. So just even tracking those patterns across generations can be very fascinating, to look at who's replicating what type of pattern. So, and another thing you'll see is that in the treatment process, with families, they will often, work with the family together, but they'll often work with dyads. They might work with just the couple, or they might work with just one parent and one child. So depending on what attachment bonds need to be repaired. So they'll do dyads, they'll do the whole family together, and they'll mix it up a little bit to work on repairing the various bonds in the family. So let's talk about EFT on telehealth. So in terms of telehealth, and I would say this is true for all of the humanistic experiential approaches, I think most of us will agree that doing these emotionally focused interventions, emotionally based interventions, experiential interventions are just tougher on telehealth. And the main reason is we have so many fewer nonverbals to work with. So I remember during the pandemic, when I had to put all my clients online, I do work with couples. I use a lot of methods that are, like EFT, and I use my Unifying Framework has a lot of EFT-like interventions in it as well. And I was it was surprisingly difficult to do enactments on telehealth. And what I realized when I first started doing telehealth with couples was, like, when you do, especially couples therapy in the room, and also true with individuals and families, but I think it's most palpable with couples. Like, there is a vibe in the room. And I know I'm from California and we talk about our vibes, and everyone makes fun of us here in California, but oh my God, when you're with a couple, you can feel when someone gets triggered. And what's interesting is, unless they have a face that immediately shows it, there's usually a 10 to 30-second delay or more before you can see it on a computer, on telehealth. And so being aware of that, and that's one of if I'm going to do couples therapy, on telehealth, I have a special part of my informed consent, which is, because we're not in a room together, I will not, there is this 10 to 30-second delay, which is a lot of time in couples therapy when they're starting to escalate. Trust me, that is a huge loss. And so I do make my clients raise their hand, just like the woman in the picture here. Raise your hand when you're triggered, because I can't even wait 10 to 30 seconds to figure it out by the time you're saying something pretty hurtful across to your partner. So, so that is the hardest part. Now, it can be done with lower conflict couples. If you have high conflict couples, especially if there's any history of emotional or physical abuse, they're probably not good candidates for telehealth, because you have to be able to manage the conflict. And I once did have a couple who, they did fine for like on and off for a year. We worked together, but it escalated to a point, and there were substances involved. There was a gun in the house I knew about. So I'm like, no, we are not doing telehealth. If I cannot stabilize you. So the one thing I would say with EFT or with couples, if you're going to do telehealth, you have to be able to stabilize them while they're on the screen. So I do have them raise their hand, and it ended up being an incredible intervention, because they started to self-regulate. They started to be the ones who are like, they're at home without me, right? And then one person just raises their hand. I'm triggered. And okay, let's pause. Let's talk about what's going on, or take a break. So it ended up being really beautiful, and they did more self-regulation without me there than people who only saw me in person. But you do want to be careful around this. So you're going to have to create safety in the room. You need to monitor each person's engagement and really working on your therapeutic presence. And so making sure that, you are well lit, It's funny, I know I've debated with various of my colleagues about, this is my therapy background that you're looking on right now. It is my face, very little in the background. It's not totally stark, but there's not a lot there. And that's so that they feel like they are connected to me. And so you need to hopefully have you're going to have to be expressive when you're talking with them. I often will use my hands like you're seeing here. But they can see my face very well. They see only my face. There's no room that they're seeing. There's no blurred background. But you need to be able to have a strong therapeutic presence on the screen to do this type of work, to do this, things like getting into the primary emotions, using your voice to get them, to get in touch with their emotions. And so you can definitely do it online. And you want to do more checking in with people. How was that? How are you feeling right now? Because you just don't have enough nonverbals. I'll tell you a quick hilarious story. At least I thought it was really funny. I was working with a couple, and I had helped the couple get into some really painful emotions around what had happened with a very traumatic event with one of their children. And I know I had this very highly accomplished man, a serious scientist, right? So very, very logical, very, very together, highly accomplished professionally. And, in this session, I really touched on those vulnerable emotions. There was a lot of tears. And at the end, asking how was that, and I said, did I do okay? Because you want to check in. What was that like? Because it's different when you're doing it, on telehealth, and you want to make sure that I said, if I were in the room, I would be a little bit better, at being able to read you. I just need to check in. Are you, how are you doing? Because this was a very, deep session. They're like, oh, if in the room you read me better, I don't want to see you in person. But I do check in with people when we have kind of emotionally intense sessions. I will do it in person, but I'm much more conscientious and diligent about doing it online, because you don't have half the nonverbals to understand what just happened and how they're processing it. So definitely you'll do a lot more checking in, especially when you have those more intense emotions with your clients. And then finally, we want to look at just diversity applications when using EFT. They have done a lot of research in terms of using EFT with diverse populations, especially in terms of racial, ethnic diversity. And there has been a specific approach kind of adapted for working with Latinx clients. But just remember this, all emotional expression is guided by our dominant cultural discourses about how emotions are expressed. And there usually are very different rules for men versus women in a given society. And so you need to be very conscious of, how you're coaching clients to express their emotions, what you're expecting from them. I've done a lot of time doing live supervision behind a mirror. And oftentimes, especially newer clinicians will sometimes look at a client and say, oh, they don't seem very sincere. That doesn't seem very, fill in the blank, right? Because the person's expressing the emotions differently. And so you really want to be cognizant of what kind of standard you're applying, where you're getting the idea of what that looks like, because emotions are very much, the appropriate expression of emotion is very much culturally defined. And so you want, people from more individualistic cultures like the United States or Europe, Northern Europe specifically, are often going to have a more restrained approach. People from communal cultures will often have a more expressive approach to emotions. And there's a huge spectrum of healthy expression of norms. And so you want to really be careful that, you're not applying like one single set. And I've seen people often take kind of the humanistic or, a very Rogerian approach to expressing emotions in a very, demonstrative way, and kind of pathologize people unnecessarily, because it's like, nope, this is how a Midwestern, male might express their emotions. This is culturally normal. It's just a lot, not as broad, it's more narrow. just even regions within the United States, how people express their emotions in Southern California versus New York versus the Midwest versus Florida is different. And so just being aware of that. Now, in terms of just the concept of attachment, it has been studied cross-culturally since 1967. Um, and so if you remember the, Bowlby research, but the general consensus is that attachment needs, the need for emotional safety is pretty universal, pretty consistent across cultures. Now, what it looks like and how it is expressed across cultures can be very different, but there is this universal need. I like to say humans are herd animals. We need to have a safe group of humans to self-regulate. I mean, our brains are literally wired. We didn't get into it in this workshop, but the mirror neurons, we are wired to help regulate one another. And so we are herd animals that need emotional safety. And then this is a pretty hardwired part of being human. So, but being very conscious in terms of working cross-culturally, working and look, even with the gender norms, we can have very specific rules for emotional expression, and to really be careful about not rigidly applying these gender norms. And EFT has been used with successfully with same-sex couples, and the focus is on the same exact attachment needs, which have been identified as universal. But again, you're going to be also attending to societal discourses that add an extra burden typically to those relationships. And so working with EFT, across cultures, with diverse clients, with LGBTQ clients, you're going to be focusing on the attachment needs, but being very careful on any assumptions that you're going to use about how emotions and safety should be expressed based on a number of these variables.